My hair has always been my defining feature, my undeniable signature. In a family of quiet brunettes and sensible blondes, I was an anomaly, a splash of vibrant, defiant red. It was the color of autumn leaves, of dying embers, of a sunset that refuses to fade. At 65, my auburn locks were still thick and lustrous, a fact I attributed to a lifetime of meticulous care and the expensive, specially formulated shampoo my son, Lucas, dutifully sourced for me. It was, I had always believed, the one perfect, unassailable truth about me. I was Beatrice, the redhead. It was the foundation upon which I had built my identity, my confidence, and my quiet, unyielding pride. On the morning of my grandson's baptism, that foundation was about to be turned to dust. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from. The house was humming with the cheerful chaos of a family gathering. My son, Lucas, his wife Julia, and their beautiful 6-month-old son, Theo, were staying for the weekend. The ceremony was in a few hours, and the air was thick with the scent of coffee, baby powder, and the nervous, excited energy of a milestone day. I retreated to the master bathroom for my morning ritual, a quiet moment of preparation before the day's performance as the proud, elegant matriarch. Julia and I have always had a relationship of carefully curated politeness. She is ambitious, beautiful in a sharp, modern way, and possesses a will of steel that she masks with a saccharine smile. She married my son, but she never truly joined our family. There has always been a subtle, unspoken rivalry between us, a quiet battle for Lucas's attention, for the matriarchal throne. I saw her envy in the way she looked at my clothes, my home, my effortless command of a room, and I felt her disdain in her quiet, passive-aggressive remarks about my traditional ways. I knew she saw me as a relic, a beautifully preserved but ultimately irrelevant figure in her modern life. I had always handled her with a kind of weary, regal grace. I had, until today, always been one step ahead. In the steam-filled warmth of the bathroom, I reached for the familiar, elegant bottle of my special shampoo. I noticed, with a flicker of annoyance, that the liquid seemed a slightly different consistency, a bit cloudier than usual. I dismissed it as a change in the formula, a common enough occurrence. I lathered the shampoo into my hair, the familiar scent of sandalwood and botanicals filling the air. I rinsed, conditioned, and wrapped my hair in a thick, soft towel. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from. It was only when I began to dry it that the horror began to unfold. Under the hot air of the dryer, my hair, my glorious, fiery hair, began to change. The vibrant red was mutating, darkening into a muddy brownish sludge. And then, the first streaks of a sickening, swampy green began to appear at the roots, spreading like a disease through the strands. I dropped the hairdryer. It clattered onto the tiled floor, the sound unnervingly loud in the sudden ringing silence. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my heart a wild, panicked bird beating against the cage of my ribs. It was a nightmare, a grotesque, surreal joke. My hair, my pride, my identity was a ruined, mottled mess of garish, putrid green. Tears, hot and immediate, stung my eyes. This was not an accident. This was an attack, a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty designed to humiliate me on one of the most important days of my family's life. And I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as a stone in my gut, who had done it. Julia. It had to be. Only she possessed the subtle, venomous cruelty to conceive of such a thing. Only she would derive a perverse pleasure from seeing me, the proud matriarch, brought low, transformed into a pathetic, green-haired caricature of myself. The humiliation was a physical thing, a tightening in my chest, a sour taste in my mouth. I thought of the church, filled with our family and friends. I thought of the photographs that would be taken, preserving this moment of my degradation for eternity. I imagined Julia's small, triumphant smile, the flicker of victory in her eyes. The thought was unbearable. I sank onto the plush velvet bench in my dressing room, my body trembling with a mixture of rage and a deep, profound shame. The steam from the bathroom began to clear, but the fog in my mind was only just beginning to descend. I looked at the stranger in the mirror, at the woman with the ruined, clown-like hair, and I felt a lifetime of carefully constructed confidence begin to crumble. The baptism was in 2 hours, and Beatrice, the redhead, was gone. In her place was a monster, and I had no idea who I was supposed to be now. The world outside my bedroom door continued its cheerful, oblivious hum. I could hear the sounds of my family preparing for the day, the excited babble of my grandson, Theo, the low, calming murmur of Lucas's voice, the sharp, bright peals of Julia's laughter. That sound, her laughter, was like a shard of glass in my ear. I imagined her, dressed in some chic minimalist outfit, her face a mask of concern, secretly savoring her victory. The thought was so galling, so infuriating, that it momentarily eclipsed my own shame. "Mom, are you almost ready?" Lucas called through the closed door. "We need to leave in about an hour." I couldn't answer. My voice was a knot of unshed tears in my throat. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring at the catastrophic results of Julia's sabotage. The green was not a subtle tint. It was a lurid chemical stain, most vibrant at the roots and fading into a muddy, khaki color through the lengths. It was a deliberate, undeniable act of desecration. It was as if she had taken a can of spray paint to a priceless work of art. My work of art. Me. "Mom?" Lucas's voice was closer now, tinged with a note of concern. "Is everything all right? I'm not feeling well," I managed to croak out, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "I don't think I can go." There was a pause on the other side of the door. "Not go? Mom? It's Theo's baptism. You're his grandmother. Of course you're going." "No," I said, my voice gaining a new, hard edge of resolve. I'm not leaving this room." I walked to the door and turned the old, heavy brass key in the lock. The click was loud and final in the quiet room. It was an act of surrender, a retreat from a battle I felt I had already lost. I could not face the pitying stares, the whispered gossip, the triumphant, knowing smirk on Julia's face. I would not give her the satisfaction. I could hear him conferring with Julia in the hallway. Their voices were muffled, but I could make out the tone. His was worried. Hers was a performance of wifely concern, laced with an undercurrent of what I could only imagine was barely concealed glee. "Maybe she's just nervous, darling," I heard her say. "Give her a moment. I'll go check on Theo." She was a masterful actress. She had delivered the poison, and now she was playing the part of the concerned nursemaid. The next hour was a form of exquisite torture. My phone began to buzz incessantly on the bedside table. My sisters, my cousins, my oldest friends, all wanting to know where I was, if I was all right. Each buzz was a fresh wave of humiliation. I ignored them all. I sat on the edge of my bed, a prisoner in my own silk dressing gown, and stared at my monstrous reflection in the vanity mirror. Who was this woman, this clown with the swamp-colored hair? My entire life, my hair had been my armor. It was the source of my confidence, the thing that made me stand out, the thing that made me me. When my husband, a man I had loved with a quiet, steady devotion, had died 5 years ago, I had grieved, but I had not crumbled. I had held my head high, my red hair a defiant banner against the encroaching grayness of widowhood. I had been strong. I had been dignified. Now I was a joke, a pathetic, green-haired old woman, hiding in her bedroom while her family celebrated a milestone without her. Julia had not just ruined my hair, she had stripped me of my dignity. She had taken my armor and melted it down into a puddle of green sludge. The knocking on the door became more insistent. "Mom, please," Lucas's voice was pleading now. "Open the door. Talk to me. What is going on? People are starting to arrive at the church. They're asking where you are. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from." "Go away, Lucas," I said, my voice flat and dead. "There is nothing to talk about. I am not well." "I'm not leaving until you open this door," he said, his voice firm. I heard the sound of him settling himself on the floor, his back against the door. He was as stubborn as his father had been. I knew this standoff could not last forever, but I did not know how to end it. How could I emerge from this room and face the world? How could I explain the inexplicable? To admit what Julia had done would be to admit her power over me, to give her the public victory she so clearly craved. To say nothing would be to endure the humiliation in silence. There was no winning move. I looked at my reflection again, at the garish, unnatural color that had invaded my life. It was the color of envy, the color of malice. And as I stared at it, my own shame began to curdle into a slow, burning rage. She would not win. I would not let her. I did not know how, but I would not let this be the final chapter of my story. With a deep, shuddering breath, I stood up. I walked to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the key. I would face my son, and then I would face her. The battle was not over. It had only just begun. The moment I turned the key, the heavy silence between my locked room and the outside world was broken. The click of the old brass lock seemed to echo, a sound of surrender. Lucas was on his feet instantly, his hand on the doorknob. He pushed the door open slowly, cautiously, as if expecting to find a scene of devastation. He was not wrong. He stepped into the room and stopped dead, his eyes widening in disbelief. He stared at my hair, at the grotesque, swampy green that clung to my normally vibrant red lock. His face, which had been a mask of worried concern, morphed into a new, more complex expression: shock, confusion, and something else. A flicker of a deeper, more familiar pain that I couldn't immediately place. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice a mixture of horror and disbelief. What happened to your hair?" The question, so simple and so direct, broke the dam of my composure. The rage that had been simmering within me dissolved into a fresh wave of raw, helpless grief. A sob escaped my lips, a ragged, ugly sound. "She did this, Lucas," I choked out, the words tumbling out in a rush of tears and fury. "Your wife, she did this to me." I explained in a broken, rambling narrative what had happened. The different-looking shampoo, the horrifying transformation, the public humiliation that awaited me. I told him how Julia must have switched the contents of the bottle, how this was the culmination of years of her quiet, simmering resentment. "She wanted to hurt me," I cried, burying my face in my hands. "She wanted to make me a laughingstock on the day of my own grandson's baptism. She hates me. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from." I expected him to be angry. I expected him to rush out of the room, to confront his wife, to defend his mother's honor. I expected the righteous indignation of a loving son. Instead, he just stood there, his face ashen, his expression one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. He looked not at my hair, but at me, at my tear-streaked face, and a single tear traced a path down his own cheek. "Oh, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with a pain that seemed to come from a place far deeper than the events of this morning. "It wasn't Julia." His words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my grief momentarily replaced by a sharp, defensive anger. "Of course, it was her. Who else could it be? Who else would be so cruel?" "It wasn't her," he repeated, his voice barely audible. He walked over to me and knelt on the floor, taking my trembling hands in his. His hands were cold, clammy. This is my fault." "Your fault?" I was completely bewildered. "Lucas, that makes no sense. Why would you do this?" He shook his head, his eyes squeezed shut as if he were in physical pain. "Not like that, Mom. I didn't do this to you. But I am responsible." He took a deep, shuddering breath, and when he opened his eyes, they were filled with a lifetime of unspoken secrets. "The shampoo," he began, his voice low and hesitant. It's not what you think it is." He looked so lost, so pained, that my own anger began to recede, replaced by a growing sense of unease. This was not the conversation I had been expecting. The clear, simple narrative of my daughter-in-law's villainy was beginning to blur, to dissolve into something far more complicated and confusing. "Mom," he said, his gaze unwavering, "we need to talk about your hair, about everything, about Grandpa." "My father? What did my father, a man who had been dead for 10 years, have to do with this?" The cold knot of suspicion in my stomach tightened into a ball of ice. The foundations of my world, which had been shaken by the events of the morning, now began to crumble in earnest. "I don't understand, Lucas," I whispered. "I know," he said, his voice gentle, "but you will." He stood up and walked over to the antique vanity where I had spent countless hours of my life, brushing, styling, and admiring my beautiful red hair. He picked up my silver-backed hairbrush, the one my father had given me on my 16th birthday. "Tell me, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but insistent, "what is your very first memory of your hair?" The question was so strange, so out of place, that I could only stare at him, uncomprehending. The truth, I was beginning to realize, was not a simple story of a cruel prank. It was a labyrinth, and I was standing at its entrance with no idea of the monsters that lay within. The day of my grandson's baptism was turning into a day of reckoning, but the person on trial I was starting to fear was not Julia. It was me. The question hung in the air between us, heavy and strange. "What is your very first memory of your hair?" My mind, still reeling from the shock and humiliation of the morning, struggled to find purchase. It was like being asked to recall my first memory of breathing. My hair had always just been. It was the most fundamental, immutable fact of my existence. I was Beatrice. I had red hair. What a ridiculous question, Lucas, I said, my voice sharp with a new defensive confusion. I've always had it. It's always been red. Has it? He asked, his voice gentle, but with an insistent, probing quality that unnerved me. He was not just asking a question. He was pulling at a thread, a single, loose thread in the tapestry of my life, and I had the terrifying premonition that if he pulled hard enough, the entire thing would unravel. He sat down on the velvet bench beside me, the silver-backed hairbrush still in his hand. Think, Mom. Really think. A specific memory, the earliest one you can conjure. I closed my eyes, trying to push past the immediate garish reality of the green stains. I tried to go back to my childhood. I saw flashes of memory, bright, disjointed images. My mother braiding my long red pigtails on the porch swing. My father calling me his little firecracker. The other children at school, sometimes teasing me, calling me Carrot Top, but more often looking at me with a kind of fascinated envy. My hair had always made me different. It had made me special. I remember my 5th birthday party, I said slowly, the memory emerging from the fog of time. I was wearing a yellow dress, and my mother had tied my hair up with a big yellow ribbon. I remember feeling like a princess. A yellow ribbon, Lucas repeated softly. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful tenderness. You were 6, Mom, not 5, and it was a few weeks after you came home from the hospital. The hospital. The word landed in the quiet room with the weight of a stone. It was a part of my childhood I rarely thought about, a dim, hazy memory of sterile white rooms, of hushed, worried voices, of a long, tired period of being sick, a fever, my parents had always told me, a bad one. But the details were a blur, a story told to me rather than a memory I truly owned. What does the hospital have to do with anything? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Everything, he said. The fever. It was more than just a fever. It was a severe infection. The drugs they used to save you, they had side effects. One of them was alopecia, total hair loss. The words didn't make sense. They were a random collection of sounds, a language I didn't understand. Alopecia, hair loss. I ran a trembling hand through my own thick, albeit green-stained hair. It was a lie. It had to be. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking. My hair, look at it. I've always had it. No, Mom, he said, his voice breaking. You haven't. He stood up and walked over to the large, ornate wardrobe in the corner of the room, the one that had belonged to my parents. He opened it. The familiar, comforting scent of cedar and old memories wafted out. He reached into the back, behind the neat stacks of my late husband's sweaters, and he pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was my father's old journal. Grandpa gave this to me before he died, Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. He made me promise to keep his secret, to protect you, just like he always had. I think he would want you to know the truth. Now, he handed me the journal. My father's elegant architectural script filled the pages. It was filled with his thoughts, his dreams, his daily observations. But as I flipped through the pages, I began to see a recurring theme: sketches of hairstyles, notes on color mixing, names of suppliers in Europe who dealt in the finest European hair. It was a lexicon of a world I didn't know, a secret craft hidden within the mundane entries of his life. And then I saw it. An entry dated a few weeks after my 6th birthday. Beatrice came home today. She is so thin, so pale, but she is alive. That is all that matters. Her hair, of course, is all gone. The doctors say it may never grow back. My poor little firecracker. Her spirit is so dim. Today, I brought her a present. A new hat, I called it. It is the first one I have ever made. The color is not quite right. A bit too orange, but her smile, when she saw herself in the mirror with her red pigtails again, her smile was like the sun coming out from behind the cloud. She thinks it is her own hair, growing back. My wife and I have decided. We will let her believe it. We will protect her from this one cruel truth. It will be our secret, our life's work, to keep our daughter's spirit from breaking. I looked up from the journal, my eyes blind with tears. I looked at my son, at his pained, loving face, and I looked at my own reflection in the mirror, at the garish green streaks, at the woman with the beautiful red hair, a hair that was not my own, a life that was not my own. The humiliation of the morning was nothing. It was a pale, insignificant shadow compared to the vast, gaping void that had just opened up beneath me. My entire life, my entire identity, The one thing I had held on to as my own unassailable truth was a lie. A beautiful, loving, and utterly devastating lie. The journal felt impossibly heavy in my hands, each page a new, staggering blow to the foundations of my reality. My father, a man I remembered as a quiet, kind, and impeccably dressed architect, a man of straight lines and solid structures, had been the secret architect of my entire identity. His journal was not the record of a life. It was the blueprint of a lie. A beautiful, intricate, and soul-shattering deception constructed out of pure, desperate love. I flipped through the pages, my mind struggling to reconcile the man I knew with the secret artist revealed in these entries. The years unfolded in a dizzying, surreal narrative. There were detailed sketches of me at different ages, with notes in the margins. Age 8, pigtails must be longer now, more natural movement. Age 12, a softer shoulder-length style. More mature. Age 16. Time for a new one. The color needs more depth, less of the childish brightness. Must source a better lace front. He had chronicled my life not in milestones, but in wigs. Each new chapter of my life, my first dance, my graduation, my wedding day, was preceded by a new creation from his secret workshop, a new, perfect facsimile of natural aging hair that I had accepted without a single flicker of suspicion. He had been a puppet master, and I had been his willing, oblivious marionette. Lucas sat with me in the quiet of the bedroom, giving me the space to process the unthinkable. The church bells began to ring in the distance, a mournful, tolling sound that seemed to be marking not the celebration of a new life, but the death of my own. How? I finally whispered, my voice a dry, rasping sound. How did I never know? You were a child, Mom, Lucas said gently, and they were masters of their craft. Grandpa. He became obsessed. He studied the art of wig making with the same precision he applied to his architecture. He traveled to Europe. He learned from the best theater and film artisans. He sourced the finest human hair. It was his secret passion, his life's great project, and Grandma was his co-conspirator. She was the one who would trim your hair, who would subtly swap out the old one for the new one while you slept. I remembered the strange, sleepy nights when my mother would insist on brushing my hair before bed, her touch so gentle, her voice a low, soothing lullaby. I had always thought it was an act of maternal affection. I now realized it was an act of surgical precision, a carefully orchestrated transfer of one illusion for another. The shampoo, I whispered, the final horrifying piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Lucas nodded, his expression pained. It was never a shampoo, Mom. It was a custom-blended cleaning and conditioning solution Grandpa created. It was designed specifically for the delicate, color-treated hair of the wigs. He kept the formula in his journal. After he died, he gave the journal to me. He made me promise to continue, to protect you. My own son, he had been a part of it too. The man who dutifully sourced my special shampoo from a non-existent supplier, the man who arranged for my hair appointments at a salon that was, in fact, a specialist in wig maintenance and styling. My whole life had been a stage play, and I was the only actor who didn't know her lines. Julia? I asked, the name a strange, foreign sound in my mouth now. The morning's all-consuming rage felt like a distant, childish tantrum. She has no idea, Lucas said. No one does, except you and me. And now, I suppose, the cleaning lady. He explained his theory. The new cleaning lady, unfamiliar with the house, must have been tidying the bathroom and accidentally spilled a bottle of strong, ammonia-based cleaner. Some of it must have gotten into the shampoo bottle, which had been left uncapped. The chemical reaction between the ammonia and the delicate organic dyes used on the wig had been immediate and catastrophic. It was not an act of malice. It was a simple, mundane, and devastating accident. The irony was so bitter, it almost made me laugh. I had spent the morning consumed with a Shakespearean drama of jealousy and betrayal, when the truth was a simple domestic farce, a spilled bottle of cleaner. I stood up and walked to the vanity mirror, my movements stiff and robotic. I looked at the woman in the reflection, at the garish green streaks, at the familiar face framed by a lifetime of lies. Who was she? Who was I? If the most fundamental, undeniable fact of my physical self was a fabrication, then what was real? Was my confidence a sham? Was my pride a borrowed costume? My entire sense of self, the very core of my being, had been built on a foundation of red hair, and that foundation had just been revealed to be a wig. I reached up, my fingers trembling, and I touched my scalp. For the first time in my conscious life, I allowed myself to feel for the edge, the seam, the dividing line between the illusion and the reality. And there it was, a fine, almost imperceptible ridge just above my hairline, a place I had never thought to touch, a question I had never thought to ask. It was real. The lie was real. With a choked, guttural cry that was a mixture of grief and rage, I hooked my fingers under the edge of the wig and I pulled. The sensation was alien, a bizarre and terrifying unpeeling of my own skin. The wig, which had been a part of me for as long as I could remember, resisted for a moment, its intricate lace and medical-grade adhesive clinging to my scalp with the tenacity of a lifelong habit. And then, with a soft, tearing sound, it came free. I held it in my hands, this heavy, lifeless thing, this beautiful, fraudulent mane of red hair, now stained with a sickly chemical green. It was a grotesque, tragic object, the sum of a lifetime of love and deception. It was my father's masterpiece. It was my life's great lie, and it was no longer me. With a cry of revulsion, I threw it across the room. It landed in a heap on the floor, a dead, pathetic creature. And then I turned to face the mirror. The woman who stared back at me was a stranger, a pale, terrified, and utterly bald stranger. My head was a smooth white dome, dotted with the faint silvery wisps of what must have been my own true hair, a hair I had never known. The absence of the familiar fiery frame around my face was a shock so profound it was almost physical. My features, which had always been defined by the vibrant color of my hair, now seemed stark, exposed, and unfamiliar. My eyes looked too big, my face too pale. I looked naked, unfinished, a preliminary sketch for a person who had never been completed. I reached up and touched my scalp, my own skin. The sensation was revelatory. It was warm and soft and real. It was me, the real me, a me I had never met. The shock gave way to a tidal wave of grief, a storm of emotions so vast and so violent it threatened to drown me. I sank to the floor, my body racked with sobs. I was not just crying for the loss of my hair, for the loss of my identity. I was crying for the little girl who had been so sick she had lost her hair in the first place. I was crying for the loving, desperate father who had spent his life constructing an elaborate, beautiful cage to protect her. I was crying for the young woman who had walked down the aisle, her head held high, unknowingly wearing a lie. I was crying for the 65-year-old woman who had just discovered that her entire life had been a meticulously crafted illusion. Lucas was there, kneeling on the floor beside me, his arms around me, his own tears mingling with mine. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He just held me as the storm broke, as decades of repressed truth came pouring out in a torrent of raw, unfiltered grief. "He loved you so much, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. "They both did. They thought they were protecting you. They wanted you to feel beautiful. They wanted you to be whole." "But I wasn't whole, was I?" I choked out, the words torn from me. "I was a fabrication, a beautiful, empty doll." We stayed like that for a long time, huddled together on the floor of my bedroom, the world outside, with its baptisms and its celebrations, a distant, irrelevant noise. The church bells began to ring again, a frantic, questioning peal now. My phone, which I had forgotten, began to buzz on the nightstand, a persistent, annoying insect. Slowly, very slowly, the storm of my grief began to subside, leaving in its wake a strange, desolate calm. The initial shock was beginning to recede, and in its place, something new, something hard and cold and sharp, was beginning to form. It was anger, a pure, clean, and righteous anger. I was angry at my parents for their loving, suffocating deception. I was angry at my father for his beautiful, intricate lies. I was angry at my son for his complicity, for his continuation of the charade. And most of all, I was angry at myself, angry at my own blindness, my own lack of curiosity, my own unquestioning acceptance of the reality that had been presented to me. How could I have lived for 65 years and never once questioned the fundamental truth of my own body? I looked at the pathetic, green-stained wig lying in a heap on the floor. It was a symbol of everything I had just lost, but it was also, I realized, a symbol of everything I could now gain: freedom. The terrifying, exhilarating, and absolute freedom from a lifetime of illusion. I got to my feet, my movements stiff and unsteady. I walked back to the mirror, and I looked, really looked, at the bald woman who stared back at me. She was a stranger, yes, but she was a real stranger. She was not a fabrication. Julia, I said, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. She thought she was attacking my greatest pride, but she was just attacking a lie. The irony was so bitter, so profound, it was almost funny. My cruel, vindictive daughter-in-law, in her clumsy attempt to humiliate me, had inadvertently given me the greatest, most terrifying gift of my life, the truth. I looked at Lucas, my son, my co-conspirator. "Leave me alone for a little while," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I need to think." He nodded, his eyes filled with a worried uncertainty. He left the room, closing the door softly behind him. I was alone. Alone with my new, terrifying, and undeniable self. The unbecoming was complete, and now I had to decide who I was going to become. After Lucas left, a profound and heavy silence descended upon the room. It was broken only by the distant, insistent ringing of the church bells and the muffled, frantic buzzing of my phone on the nightstand. The world was demanding my presence, demanding an explanation for my absence. But the world, with its social obligations and its superficial judgments, felt a million miles away. I was in a state of suspended animation, a ghost in my own life, hovering between a past that had been revealed as a fiction and a future that was a terrifying blank page. My eyes fell upon my father's journal, which lay open on the bed where Lucas had left it. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the worn leather cover. For most of my life, this journal had been a sealed book, a private record of a man I thought I knew. Now it was the key, the Rosetta Stone, that would allow me to decipher the strange, new language of my own life. With a deep, shuddering breath, I began to read. I didn't just skim the pages this time. I read every word, every entry, starting from the beginning. I immersed myself in the secret life of my father, the quiet architect who had been a master craftsman of a different sort. The early entries were filled with a young father's joy, his love for his little firecracker, with the hair the color of a sunset. And then the entries turned dark. The descriptions of my illness were stark, clinical, and filled with a barely concealed terror. He wrote of the fevers, the hospital stays, the desperate whispered consultations with doctors, and then the entry that described the loss of my hair. "It all came out this morning," he wrote, in clumps, on her pillow. She cried, not because she understood what was happening, but because she saw the look on her mother's face. "I feel as if I have failed her. The world is already so cruel. How can I send my beautiful, vibrant girl out into it with a wound so visible?" It was in the pages that followed that I discovered the true depth of his love, a love that was as obsessive as it was protective. The decision to create the first wig was not made lightly. It was debated, agonized over. My mother had been hesitant, worried about the ethics of such a profound deception. But my father had been adamant. "It is not a deception," he wrote. "It is a shield to protect her spirit until she is strong enough to face the world on her own terms." The journal chronicled his secret education, the trips to New York and London under the guise of architectural conferences, where he actually spent his days in the back rooms of theatrical wig makers, learning the painstaking ancient art. He documented his experiments with dyes, his search for the perfect, ethically sourced human hair, his struggles to master the art of hand-tying individual strands onto a delicate lace foundation. Each wig was a masterpiece of engineering and artistry, designed not just to look real, but to feel real, to move and breathe and behave exactly like natural hair. Each one took him hundreds of hours to create. As I grew, so did his craft. The journals were filled with his observations of me, notes that were both loving and disturbingly clinical. Beatrice is 14 now. Her friends are experimenting with new hairstyles. I must create a new piece for her, one with more length and versatility. The current one is too young for her. Or, I have noticed a few gray hairs among her friends. I must begin to introduce a few silver strands into Beatrice's next wig. The illusion must be maintained. The transition must be seamless. He was a ghostwriter, authoring the story of my physical self, and I had never even known he was holding the pen. The shampoo, I learned, was his own invention, a gentle, pH-balanced formula of distilled water, vegetable glycerin, and a blend of essential oils designed to clean and preserve the delicate, color-treated fibers of the wigs without causing damage. The bottle, which I had always believed was a product of some exclusive European brand, was simply a bottle he refilled in the secrecy of his workshop. The final entries were the most painful to read. They were written in the last few months of his life, his handwriting growing shaky and weak. He wrote of his fear, not of dying, but of leaving me. He wrote of his desperate search for someone to whom he could pass on his secret, his sacred trust. He had considered telling my husband, but had decided against it. He is a good man, he wrote, but he is not a craftsman. He does not understand the art of the illusion. And so, he had chosen Lucas. The final entry was a letter to my son. My dear Lucas, it began, I am leaving you with a burden, a heavy and a strange one, but you have your grandfather's hands, and more importantly, you have his heart. I am entrusting you with the care of your mother. I am entrusting you with my life's greatest work. Protect her. Keep her spirit safe. The world can be a cruel place for a woman. Do not let it break her. The formula for the solution is on the next page. The supplier for the hair is in my address book. The time will come when she needs a new one. I trust you will know what to do. I closed the journal, the tears streaming down my face. My anger was gone, washed away by a wave of love so profound it was almost unbearable. My father had not lied to me. He had loved me. He had loved me with a fierce, protective, and tragically misguided devotion. He had spent his life constructing a beautiful, perfect cage for me, believing it was a sanctuary, and I had lived in it, happily, obliviously, for 65 years. I understood now the depth of the love, the weight of the secret. I understood my son's pained complicity, but understanding was not the same as acceptance. My father had wanted to protect my spirit, but in doing so, he had denied me my own truth. He had denied me the chance to be strong on my own terms. I looked at the ruined wig on the floor. It was a symbol of my father's love, but it was also a symbol of my own captivity. And I knew, with a sudden, shocking clarity, what I had to do. I could not stay in the cage, no matter how beautiful it was. It was time to break free. The weight of my father's love, as revealed in the pages of his journal, was a heavy, suffocating thing. It was a love that had built me a beautiful, elaborate identity, and in doing so, had robbed me of my own. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, the journal in my lap, the ruined wig a pathetic green-tinged heap in the corner, and I felt a profound, disorienting sense of unreality. If I was not Beatrice, the fiery redhead, the confident, elegant matriarch, then who was I? I was a ghost, a fabrication, a character in a story written by a man who had loved me too much. My phone, which had been buzzing with a frantic, insistent rhythm, finally fell silent. I imagined the scene at the church, the guests shifting uncomfortably in the pews, the priest looking at his watch, Lucas and Julia fielding worried questions, offering vague, meaningless excuses, and my grandson, Theo, the guest of honor, blissfully unaware of the family drama that was eclipsing his special day. A new emotion, sharp and clear, cut through the fog of my grief and confusion. It was shame, not the shame of my green-streaked hair, which now seemed a trivial, almost comical detail, but a deeper, more profound shame. I was hiding. I was cowering in my bedroom, a 65-year-old woman having a tantrum, while my family, my son, my grandson, were waiting for me. I was allowing this revelation, this lie, to have power over me. I was proving my father right. I was fragile. I was a spirit that needed protecting. The thought was a spark in the darkness, and it ignited a fire. I stood up, my movements no longer stiff and robotic, but filled with a new, unfamiliar energy. I walked back to the vanity mirror, the one that had been the site of so much pride and so much pain. I looked at myself, at the pale, tear-streaked face of the bald woman in the reflection. She was a stranger, and I hated her. I hated her for her weakness, for her fear, for her 65 years of oblivious self-deception. But as I stared into her eyes, I saw something else. I saw a flicker of defiance, a glint of steel. I saw the daughter of the man who had built a world out of love and lies. I saw the mother of the man who had carried that secret with a heavy, loyal heart. I saw a survivor. With a sudden, violent, and deeply satisfying impulse, I swept my arm across the top of the vanity. Bottles of perfume, silver-backed brushes, porcelain trinkets, all of it went crashing to the floor, a cascade of shattering glass and broken memories. It was the sound of a life being demolished. And then, in the sudden ringing silence, I saw it. The thing that would be my salvation. It was my late husband's old grooming set, which I kept in a leather box on the corner of the vanity. And inside it, nestled in a bed of worn velvet, was his straight razor. It was a beautiful object, an antique, with a handle of carved mother of pearl and a blade of gleaming German steel. He had rarely used it, preferring the convenience of a modern razor, but he had kept it for its beauty, its sense of tradition. I picked it up. The weight of it was cold and dangerous in my hand. I opened the blade. It glinted in the soft light of the bedroom, a sliver of pure, uncompromising reality. I looked at my reflection again, at the smooth, pale dome of my scalp, and at the few pathetic, downy wisps of graying hair that still clung to it, a final, mocking reminder of the truth I had never known. They had to go. All of it had to go. This was not an act of self-harm. It was an act of self-creation. I would not be defined by my father's lie. I would not be defined by the absence of my hair. I would define myself. I would be the architect of my own identity. I lathered my scalp with the last of my expensive, fraudulent shampoo. And then, with a hand that was as steady as a surgeon's, I began to shave. Stroke after careful stroke, I scraped away the last vestiges of my old life, the last lingering threads of the beautiful, suffocating tapestry my father had woven for me. The process was slow, methodical, a ritual of purification. With each pass of the blade, I felt a layer of my old self being stripped away. The shame, the anger, the grief, the fear, all of it fell away, leaving behind something new, something clean, something hard and pure. When I was finished, my scalp was as smooth and as pale as a river stone. I rinsed my head, the water cool and shocking on my newly exposed skin. I looked in the mirror. The woman who stared back at me was no longer a stranger. Her eyes were my eyes. Her face was my face. She was stripped of all artifice, all illusion. She was raw and real and undeniably, terrifyingly me. And for the first time in my life, I looked at my reflection, and I did not see a fabrication. I saw the truth, and she was, in her own strange, stark way, beautiful. I smiled, a real smile, a genuine smile, a smile that reached all the way to my eyes. The battle was over, and I had won. The decision was made in the silent, clear-eyed moment after I had laid down the razor. There was no more room for tears, no more time for hiding. The world was waiting, and I would not keep it waiting any longer. I was no longer a victim of a cruel prank or a loving deception. I was a sovereign nation, and I was about to declare my independence. I moved through my bedroom with a newfound sense of purpose, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. The chaos of my earlier outburst, the shattered bottles, the ruined wig, the scattered books, was a landscape from another life, the wreckage of a woman I no longer was. I stepped over it all without a second glance. My wardrobe was a museum of my former self, filled with the elegant, tasteful, and slightly conservative clothes of Beatrice, the respectable matriarch. I bypassed the sensible suits and the demure floral dresses. My hand landed on a dress I had bought on a whim years ago, a dress I had never had the courage to wear. It was a simple, sleeveless sheath of deep emerald green silk, the color of life, of renewal, the ironic twin of the sickly chemical green that had started this whole terrible day. It felt right. I dressed quickly, my movements fluid and confident. The cool silk of the dress against my newly exposed scalp was a strange, thrilling sensation. I put on a pair of simple, elegant earrings, my only adornment. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The woman who stared back was a stark, minimalist statement. She was bold and strange, and utterly, unapologetically herself. I was ready. As I walked out of the bedroom, I found Lucas pacing in the hallway, his face a mask of anxiety. He stopped short when he saw me, his mouth falling open in a silent gasp. He stared at my bald head, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, awe, and a dawning, incredulous pride. "Mom," he whispered, his voice full of a reverence I had never heard before. "You are magnificent." "I know," I said, and for the first time, the words were not an expression of vanity, but a simple statement of fact. My phone, lying on the hall table, buzzed again. It was Julia. I picked it up. A string of text messages filled the screen. "Beatrice, I am so sorry. Lucas just told me. I had no idea. Please don't hate me. I was envious of you, of your confidence, your hair. I was a fool. Please come to the church. Theo needs his grandmother. We need you." I looked at the messages, at her pathetic, self-serving apology, and I felt nothing. Her petty jealousies, her clumsy cruelties, they were a part of the old world. The world of illusion. They had no power over me now. I deleted the messages without a reply. "Let's go, Lucas," I said. "We're late for your son's baptism." The drive to the church was a quiet one. Lucas kept glancing at me, a worried, questioning look in his eyes. I simply looked out the window at the world that seemed brighter, sharper, more real than it had just a few hours ago. The storm had passed, and the sun had broken through the clouds, washing the world in a clean golden light. As we pulled up to the old stone church, I could see the guests milling about on the steps, their formal clothes a stark contrast to the casual post-ceremony atmosphere they should have been enjoying. The baptism had clearly been delayed, waiting for me. Lucas turned to me, his hand on the door handle. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Mom?" "I have never been more ready for anything in my life," I said. He nodded, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. He got out of the car and came around to open my door. He offered me his arm. I took it, and together we began to walk. The moment we stepped onto the church grounds, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. 100 pairs of eyes fixed on me, on my bald head, shining like a beacon in the afternoon sun. I could feel the ripple of shock, of disbelief, of morbid curiosity pass through them. I saw my sister's hands fly to their mouths. I saw my old friends stare, their faces a mixture of pity and horror. I saw Julia, standing by the church doors, her face pale, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading regret. I ignored them all. I kept my gaze fixed on the heavy, oak doors of the church. My head was held high, my back was straight, my steps were slow, deliberate, and utterly unwavering. I was not walking a gauntlet of shame. I was walking a runway of my own design. I was the architect now, and this was my masterpiece. With Lucas by my side, I walked through the parted crowd, through the hushed, gaping silence, and I entered the church. The real ceremony, I knew, was about to begin. The inside of the church was a cavern of hushed, reverent silence, thick with the scent of old stone, beeswax, and lilies. The sunlight, filtering through the magnificent jewel-toned stained glass windows, cast pools of colored light on the marble floor. It was a place of beauty, of sanctuary, of truth, and I, in my new, unadorned state, felt for the first time that I truly belonged there. The priest, a kind, elderly man who had known my family for years, stood at the altar, his expression one of gentle, bewildered concern. The entire congregation was on its feet, their heads turned, their faces a sea of shock and confusion. They were staring at me, the monstrous, bald matriarch who had disrupted their sacred ceremony. But I did not feel their judgment. I felt only their attention. And for the first time, I commanded it not with the artifice of my appearance, but with the sheer, undeniable force of my presence. Lucas led me down the central aisle, our footsteps echoing in the vast, silent space. He was my rock, my anchor, his hand a warm, steady presence on my arm. I could feel his pride, his love, his unwavering support, and it gave me a strength I had never known. We reached the front pew, where Julia was standing, holding a sleeping Theo. Her face was a wreck of conflicting emotions, shame, regret, and a flicker of something else, something I had never seen in her before, awe. Her eyes met mine, and in their depths, I saw not an enemy, but a defeated, humbled young woman who had finally been forced to confront the ugliness of her own envy. She had tried to tear me down, but she had, inadvertently, set me free. She held Theo out to me, a silent offering, a gesture of peace. I took my grandson in my arms. He was warm and heavy, and he smelled of milk and innocence. His small, perfect face was a map of a future I was now determined to be a part of, on my own terms. I turned my back on the silent, staring congregation. I turned my back on Julia, on Lucas, on the entire, complicated and loving mess of my family. Holding my grandson close, I walked alone towards the altar, towards the priest, towards the baptismal font. The priest looked at me, his old wise eyes filled not with pity, but with a deep, compassionate understanding. "Beatrice," he said softly, "we were worried." "There is no need to worry, Father," I said, my voice clear and strong, ringing through the silent church. "I am here now." I stood before the font, the cool marble a stark contrast to the warmth of the baby in my arms. The priest began the ancient, familiar rites, his voice a low, soothing murmur. He dipped his hand in the holy water and touched Theo's forehead. And then he turned to me. He looked at my bare, shining head, at the woman who had been so profoundly and publicly unmade, and then remade. And with a gesture that was not in any prayer book, a gesture of pure, spontaneous grace, he dipped his hand back into the water and he touched my scalp. The water was cool, a blessing, a baptism of my own. In that moment, under the gaze of my family, of my community, of my God, I was not a woman without hair. I was a woman who had finally found her truth. The red hair, the pride, the vanity, the carefully constructed identity. It had all been a lie. A beautiful, loving lie, but a lie nonetheless. It had been a shield, but it had also been a cage. And now I was free. I looked out at the faces of my family. I saw the love, the confusion, the dawning respect. I saw my son, his face wet with tears of pride. I saw my daughter-in-law, her head bowed in a gesture of genuine humility. I saw my sisters, my cousins, my friends, their shock slowly morphing into a kind of wondering admiration. I held my grandson a little tighter. He was the future. He was a new beginning, and I would be there to guide him, not as a perfect, untouchable matriarch, but as a real, flawed, and finally, truly strong woman. The ceremony concluded. The silence was broken by a smattering of tentative applause, which grew into a warm, sustained ovation. It was not applause for the baptism of a baby. It was applause for the resurrection of a woman. As we walked back down the aisle, Lucas by my side, Theo in my arms, the sunlight from the stained glass windows painted a path of brilliant colored light before us, a path of red and blue and gold. I walked through it, my head held high. My true color, I knew now, had never been red. It had been all the colors of the rainbow. It was the color of truth, the color of love, the color of a strength I was only just beginning to understand. It was the color of courage. Thank you very much for watching. Share with those who also like stories, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you liked my story. Cheers.